Everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed, no matter where you live, what you look like, or how modest your beginnings. But how do you create access to that opportunity so people have a chance to discover their promise and reach their full potential? The Walton Family Foundation believes in the power of opportunity to transform lives, build strong communities, and protect a natural world that sustains us all. You need to be bold, curious, open-minded, buck convention, look beyond the obvious, innovate, and embrace ideas that ignite lasting change. No one ever solved a big problem by thinking small. For more than 30 years, the Foundation has been inspired by those who never see a challenge without striving to overcome it. Those whose inventions are driven by necessity. The dreamers, the doers. Those who are closest to the problem because they're closest to the solution. Like the teacher who insists every child receives an education that meets their individual needs and taps into their unique talents. Like the family farmer who knows their future depends on healthy soil and clean water. Like the artist, determined to get his stories told on a theater stage or a gallery wall. Want to build a world-class museum in the heart of the Ozarks? Don't ask why. Ask why not. Want a heart-pumping four-season trail system that invites adventure? Build it, and people will come. Opportunity thrives in healthy environments. The Foundation conserves and protects the places we love most and need most. Colorado River, with water as plentiful as the beauty of a Grand Canyon sunset. A Mississippi River, as clean as it is mighty. A Gulf Coast with wetlands that are growing, not receding. Oceans teeming with fish to feed a hungry planet. Opportunity should never be limited by geography. It should be as available to the child in the Mississippi Delta as the one raised in Midtown Manhattan. It should be as available to the shrimper in Louisiana as the fisherman in Indonesia. The Foundation believes small towns matter as much as big cities, rural areas as much as urban. It's never easy overcoming tough challenges. It takes time and steady resolve. But one thing is true. Everyone deserves an opportunity to succeed.
Hi, everyone. I'm Carol Stern, the Executive Director of the Walton Family Foundation. I am excited and thrilled to welcome all of you today to the convening we're about to experience. Thank you for taking time out of your day to join us. You know, traditionally in the United States, work to solve the world's problem has been undertaken by three very distinct sectors: philanthropy, or the nonprofit, the marketplace, corporate, and government. And while we've partnered on occasion, it's not been a matter of course for us. Fortunately, I truly do see the trend changing and going the other way. This past year, we saw some outstanding examples of partnership in response to the COVID crisis. And we need to now ensure that we keep that going. We need to collaborate going forward because it leads to faster and more thoughtful answers to the problems that we're all trying to tackle. Time and again, we prove that strength comes from partnership. So during our time together today, you're going to hear from grantees across all of our programs. And you're going to hear them talk about the power of collaboration. You'll also hear about the insights we've gotten from new research that finds really a stunning agreement among all of us on what long-term national priorities are. Finally, you're going to hear examples of building innovative approaches and new partnerships to bring people, resources, and communities and ideas together, working across all of the sectors, government, local communities, the private and the philanthropic sectors. Before we begin the program, though, it is important to acknowledge what today is. 1 year ago today, George Floyd's life was taken. It's been a year of learning. It's been a year of unlearning. It's been a year of making changes, of rededicating ourselves and coming to the table around issues that have long needed our attention. We know that diversity is our strength. We have to build on that. And inclusiveness should be and must be an expectation. At the Walton Family Foundation, we're learning, we're growing. We recognize there is still so much more to do, not only at the foundation, but in society at large. So we're working at it. We're asking more questions. We're having meaningful and sometimes challenging conversations. Over the next 5 years, it's a strategic priority for us to be more thoughtful in our decision-making around inclusion. And we're encouraging you, all of our partners, to prioritize diversity, prioritize equity, prioritize inclusion within your organizations as well. I truly believe that together, we can and we must build a more equitable and just future. So again, thanks for joining us today. We welcome and encourage your thoughts and your engagement in the chat. And later in the program, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions during a live Q&A session. So please join me in welcoming Populous co-founder and president Todd Rose and Walton Family Foundation K-12 Education Program Director Romy Drucker to discuss the American Aspirations Index. Thanks again.
Thank you so much, Carol. I'm thrilled to be here today with Todd Rose. And Todd, we have about 10 minutes, so I'm going to ask you a couple of questions. Your new research on private opinion produced some absolutely fascinating findings that are relevant to the work of our partners who are focused on lasting systemic change. Can you give us a brief overview of your insights as a starting point?
Sure, and thanks for having me. So our focus in our research is on getting around not just what people say out loud, but what do they really think, right? And we know that social pressure distorts public opinion. So in our private opinion research, what's been most fascinating, our most recent one was on the aspirations people have for the country, like what's a great society like? And what we found, which was really shocking, frankly, was that across all demographics and even political ideology, there is a shocking amount of common ground in terms of our highest aspirations for the country. But what's even equally interesting to me, and I think what's holding us back as a society, is that while there's all this common ground, we're under what I call a collective illusion, which is that we don't believe that we have these things in common. And so we end up creating a self-fulfilling prophecy around the misperception of division.
I want to go deeper on the idea of common ground for a second. Common ground, collaboration, some people talk about common solutions. What are people looking for?
So what was fascinating to me, and I will say, like, we're not looking for common ground. We're okay. It's okay for us to have division. It's okay to have common ground. We just can't have misunderstanding, right? You can't really deal with that. But what we found in terms of common ground was pretty interesting. I would say it's a mix of traditional American values revised for our modern time. So by that, I mean this. Across all demographics, if you look at just even the top 3 trade-off priorities people have out of, over 50 priorities for the country, what you see are things like a deep respect for individual rights. I mean, people really care about that. It may not seem like it sometimes, but they really do. And that was true for, it doesn't matter who you voted for, doesn't matter where you live, doesn't matter the color of your skin, individual rights matters. But then close on its heels are a set of things that we see that we owe each other. So for example, everybody having access to high quality healthcare. It's pretty surprising. That is a top 3 priority for every single demographic. You have things like access to quality education. The one that was really surprising to me, I think, given the public discourse, was a commitment to addressing climate change. That is the number 3 highest trade-off priority for the country in the aggregate, and it is a top 15 priority no matter what, including for people who voted for President Trump, former President Trump. But once again, what we see is, whereas it is literally the number 3 priority for people in the aggregate, they perceive it to be the 33rd top priority. And so nothing happens. So we see this over and over again. The last thing I'll name, which I thought was interesting, is one of the top priorities for people across all demographics was not unity, but treating each other with respect. I mean, they want to treat each other with respect, but again, they actually think that is in the bottom 15 priority for people. So we've got this interesting mix of incredible common ground in our highest aspirations and complete collective illusion around how everybody else is thinking.
So help us think about where we go from here. So many of our partners are invested in building diverse and durable coalitions that can work together collaboratively on solutions. What are you hopeful about as you think about the work our partners are doing? And what practical advice do you have for leaders in the field who are trying to navigate both the opportunity and challenges of this moment?
Yeah, so there's a few things here, right? So the reason I keep coming back to these collective illusions is it's really important, because if the problem is not private differences, but misunderstanding of each other, if you do not address those, traditional approaches to remedying problems will backfire. I'm gonna give you one quick example, and then I'll get to some more practical advice. So in the 90s, there was a big issue with teenagers trying drugs for the first time. And people thought, the government said, here's a good idea. They spent $1 billion for almost a decade to try to basically tell people drugs are really bad, you shouldn't try them, right? Problem was that with respect to private opinion, there was plenty of research that showed teenagers weren't trying drugs because they wanted to try drugs. They were actually skeptical about it, but they were teenagers, and it was about identity and figuring out what you belong to. So the problem was that by hammering them with $1 billion of advertising telling you how bad drugs are, what they took away was, yeah, this really must be what we do, or else why would they be telling us this? And the net effect was an increase in first-time drug use. Because so if we look over in these places, like, it's important that we think about dismantling those illusions. We know how to do that. It's a culture play. It's not a systems play. And the long game is actually to elevate our voices and not stay silent and make sure people know what our opinions are. But let's get a little more practical. When we see what we see over and over again in terms of private opinion, and I don't care if you're looking at education, looking at environment, if you're looking at criminal justice, the most consistent finding in all of our research over the last 5 years is that people, they don't want better, they want different. Put a different way, when you look at institutions, say education, it is not that they are angling for better test scores alone. You know, they actually want a different purpose for education. Same thing with criminal justice. I think you'd be surprised. A supermajority of Americans want criminal justice to be rehabilitative, but they believe they're a 10% minority. They think 90% of the country wants it just to be tough on crime. Okay, so why does that matter? Well, when we get into the work we're doing, right, you realize you are in the space of transformation. You are not in the space of straight reform. And it's critical, because transformation takes you into a different set of levers, right, and ways you engage. And central to transformation is deep collaboration. So maybe we could talk just a little bit about practically about what that means. So when I think about transformative change and collaboration, there's two things that I think are just vital to keep in mind. So the first is looking for unlikely alliances. Especially under a collective illusion, the most important thing you can do is don't just get the band back together. Don't just like, hey, we've been working with these people forever. No, step back and think about the values that are animating the work that you do, and go find people with those shared values. And to be effective, collaborations that work sort of across the spectrum, right? The more orthogonal, the better. These unlikely alliances, those are the things that actually get the public to pay attention, and you have a much better chance of being effective. The second thing, and I think this is absolutely critical, is collaboration from a transformative change standpoint means deep collaboration with communities, right? Now, we all say that. We all say, of course, engage in communities. But we often, and I'm guilty of this myself, mean, yes, we'll listen a little bit, or we'll tell you, or whatever. We'll do what we think is good for you. It's not really how it works. This learning how to collaborate with communities is central to this. And I'll give you one example. It is my absolute favorite. I wish more people knew about this stuff, but there's an approach called positive deviance. And it was created by Jerry and Monique Sternin. And in the 90s, they went into Vietnam, who were lots of malnutrition all over the country. And their guiding principle was collaboration with the community rather than top-down imposition of expert solutions. And what they found was that there were some mothers who had kids that weren't malnourished, even though they were in the same context with the same constraints and same affordances. And they spent the time through collaboration getting to know them and figure out what are they doing differently. And in this case, it was pretty remarkable. These mothers were secretly feeding their kids pieces of shrimp and crab off of the lily pads in the morning in the water. Why did nobody else do that? Because a few decades earlier, a social norm emerged, nobody really knows where, that said that eating crab and shrimp was not only bad for kids, it was like harmful for them. Not true. So these mothers were trying something that was making their kids healthy, but because of the social norm, they didn't dare to say anything because they thought they would be looked upon negatively, right? So by collaborating with them, they helped elevate their voice rather than making the experts share, and helped these mothers share the solutions with other mothers. It increased child nutrition by almost 60%. That effect alone, and it continued. And they went village to village, and the solutions weren't the same, right? They were different. But the trick was collaboration with and elevating the voice of the community. So when I think about the moment we're in, under collective illusions, with private shared values, misunderstanding of each other, a commitment to transforming our institutions, that collaboration with unlikely alliances, and most importantly, with communities where we are elevating their solutions and helping those communities share in those insights.
I love your 2 points about unlikely alliances and co-creating with communities. And I want to pick up on one other thing you just said for a last question, which is about this idea of different, not better. So what are you hoping will be different in 2022 when you look ahead into next year and think about the work we're all doing in this mission-driven transformation space?
Well, so what I hope, and I think this is something that cuts across everything that we're all doing, which is, I think probably the greatest collective illusion we're facing as a society is the mistaken view that people can't be trusted. In the United States, social trust has plummeted, right? It's changed generation over generation, and free societies do not function if we don't believe that most people can be trusted to make decisions in their own lives, right? And the truth is in our own private opinion research, we get consistently almost 90% of the public that says, of course, I'm trustworthy. And in fact, in our studies of what people see as a successful life for themselves, the number 3 most important attribute was to be viewed as trustworthy. Americans care about being trustworthy. They don't believe that other people think other people are trustworthy. So we have an opportunity here through our actions, right? Nothing says I trust you more than coming into a community and instead of telling them what to do or telling them what's good, working alongside with them and using our resources and our energy to allow them to have a community that they want, right? And to respect their views and their solutions. So that's what I'm hopeful for. I believe coming out of this pandemic, we are primed to get back to this more civic society and start to turn around the tide of social trust that is going to be critical for us solving any major problems together.
Well, I am hopeful for that as well, Todd, and thank you for always providing inspiration to us, to our partners. We are so grateful for your vision. Thank you so much for talking today.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome and thank you. I am Kim Davis, Senior Advisor at the Walton Family Foundation. I want to start off by first thanking Carol for the acknowledgement of the death of George Floyd. It's obviously been a very troubling and emotional time for most of Americans, and I really appreciate an organization and a leader who acknowledges that. So I want to thank you for that. As I've been reflecting this morning, the one thing that I've thought about in regards to the death of George Floyd is the idea of coalition and collaboration. If nothing else, we've seen the world rally around an unfortunate situation, and coalitions and collaborations happen where they most likely would not have. And so for that, I'd like to launch into a panel conversation and discussion. I want to start off this morning by first allowing the panel to do a brief introduction of yourself. I'm going to give you, let's do an elevator pitch, right? But this isn't a tall building because we got a lot to get to. It's a very short building, no more than 20 floors, and the elevator's moving really quickly. And so if you could just take a brief moment to introduce yourself, and then we'll start to have some conversation about not only your work, but collaboration and what that means for the broader work of your organization, as well as the Walton Family Foundation. I'd really like to start off this morning, if you wouldn't mind, Daniel, my presidential leader, scholar brother. I'd love for you just to take a few moments in that quick elevator ride to introduce yourself and your organization. Daniel.
Sure, I guess going first too, I'll set the tone, so I'll try to be super quick. I am the CEO of Kids First Chicago, and we focus on data-informed, community-driven. So a lot of things that Mr. Rose just shared, our approach is go talk to the people who are directly impacted. I've been directly impacted by what I've heard so far. I love some of the language that's being used, but our goal is to hear from the people who are closest to the issues in education, or the ones who are making decisions who are closest to the issues. So we work with parents, and then we help parents advocate for system and policy change. And then we work alongside in partnership with parents, the district, whoever owns the policy or system, the state, the city, to see that change enacted.
Thank you for that. Gabby?
Hi, Kim, and it's great meeting you. I coordinate the Mexico Sustainable Fisheries Collective Impact Initiative, which is not a nonprofit. It's a cross-sector network that is integrated by quite a diverse group of stakeholders across the seafood supply chain in my country, in Mexico. And that includes fishers, aquaculture producers, distributors, retailers, NGOs, and researchers. I like to say that I coordinate a group of people that doesn't live in the same zip code. We are very different. We don't attend the same parties. And that's what I enjoy the most about my work.
Thank you for that. And finally, Nelson.
Yeah, hi, everybody. I'm Nelson Peacock. I'm the president and CEO of the Northwest Arkansas Council. The council is a region-wide nonprofit focused on building a better economic platform and also improving the quality of life. We're actually an organization formed by Sam Walton back in the early 90s to have small communities in Northwest Arkansas, which are now all about twice the size as they were, working together to solve region-wide problems ranging from infrastructure to economic development. We're in healthcare now, affordable housing, and so a lot of collaborations across the region for this organization.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And the elevator door is now closed. Thank you for those brief introductions. Nelson, I want to stick with you for the first question. As I sort of mentioned, if nothing else, we've learned the power of collaboration and the power of coalition. We at the Walton Family Foundation believe that we are all better when we work together to find a sustainable solution to challenges that numerous organizations and communities are partaking in. I want to ask you, tell me a little bit about how you are working with new partners across the sector to further the impact of your work. Nelson.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kim. I think the the biggest example that I can draw from recently, and it's still ongoing, is how the community was able to come together to help respond to the impacts of COVID-19 in our Marshallese and Hispanic populations. A lot of people don't know this, but this region is growing rapidly in diversity, and especially with those two populations. And at the outset of COVID-19, there was disproportionate impact in those communities. And so the CDC actually came to help us figure out why. And ultimately, we were able to put together a plan working with healthcare providers who had partnered with us on our health transformation division, local community nonprofits, the Arkansas Department of Health, and others. And we were able to develop a contact tracing and testing program that allowed us to drive down infection rates. We were able to do that working across sectors with the businesses, and also probably the most important partners were local community-based nonprofits that were providing assistance related to food assistance or rental assistance or transportation, those things that someone would need to quarantine for 14 days. A lot of these were hourly workers that really could not take 10 days off to quarantine if they were exposed. And so we were able to come together to target resources and messaging and assistance into those communities. And we're actually able to drive down infection rates, hospitalization rates, and death rates in those populations at a time when the rest of the country and this region were seeing increases in the same metrics of hospitalizations. So that was an example of government, private sector, local community-based nonprofits coming together to achieve a goal. And now we've been able to use the lessons that we've learned and the partnerships we've built to try to increase our vaccination rates in those populations. So all in all, a really good, strong partnership from top to bottom here in Northwest Arkansas.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I appreciate the introduction of the pandemic that we are currently going through. I mean, I think as we've spoken to a number of organizations and individuals across the country, they've all talked about how they've had to do things differently. And Todd sort of mentioned that, right? Not doing things better, but doing things differently because of the pandemic. Gabby, I'd like to come to you and ask you the same question. How are you working with new partners across the sector to further impact your work?
I really loved the line in the video that we saw at the beginning of this session. It said, "It's never easy overcoming big challenges." And I think that's what brings our initiative together. We recognize how complex fisheries sustainability is and the need to tackle it from a systems perspective, which sounds easy, but it's not. And while all of the network participants actually are wonderful at what they do, and they play a key role in the respective pieces of the pie, so to speak, they participate in the initiative because we have seen that a single program, organization, or institution acting alone cannot bring the sort of the large-scale change that is needed in the sector. Our multi-stakeholder composition not only facilitates dialogue with government agencies in a time in Mexico in which we're seeing a reduction of the public space for civil society, but I think that also allows us to transcend what Todd was referring to as the collective illusion, and to generate collective intelligence on complex problems and elevating them in the public agenda.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Daniel, if you wouldn't mind, I mean, I'd love for you to respond to the same question, but I'd really be interested in some specific programming that you saw or that you participated in that really helped expand your work in this very unique moment. Hey, Daniel, we'll come right back to you if you wouldn't mind. I think there's a little bit of an audio problem there. If we could, let's go ahead and address that. There we are.
I was muted.
The most popular term, right, throughout this past year, you're on mute.
That's right. Just good habits from learning how to behave in virtual. I'll start. I just want to talk a little bit about Chicago Connected, but before Chicago Connected, which is a free internet program that we have now in Chicago and came out of COVID, I just want to highlight like our model, which thankfully, and I'm grateful to be here, our model has been something that Walton has supported since 2015 when we were getting restarted. And it's focused on getting to parents and understanding what their situation is, and then trying to enact policy and system change that aligns with them, with what they want, but with them at the table for that redesign. And so nothing that we did through COVID is any different here in terms of that work, but I think that there's some different contexts that made the work much more impactful. But I did want to name, like, we have a model that we approach this work with. We're not a free internet company. We're a nonprofit that focuses on parent advocacy work. And so when COVID hit for us, the first thing we did was reach out to the families that are in our network just to understand firsthand what they were experiencing and figure out where we could be supportive. And we heard a lot of things from food insecurity and housing insecurity, but we kept hearing, we were about a week away from spring break. The school year, the district closed off school a week early. There's about 2 to 3 weeks out before they were going to come back to school. And some of the parents that were close to us were saying, hey, my neighbor doesn't have broadband access and internet. And so we started looking at that issue from a data standpoint, but we kept hearing it from the families we were talking to. And so the first stage for us is always, how do we elevate this issue? And we try to glue together the numbers with the narrative and really give the microphone to parents to share what they're experiencing. And what we saw was 1 in 5 families in Chicago were disconnected from the internet. But when you actually looked at specific neighborhoods or even specific blocks, it could be as many as 1 in 2 households that were disconnected from having broadband access, or we had city blocks where 80% of the households were not connected to the internet. And of course, these are all the spaces that we work all of us work very hard to see change, but these are all the same spaces that one would expect, high poverty, lots of Black and brown communities that were dealing with kind of this crisis. And we had plenty of parents raising their hand to say this has to be addressed. And so we put together a report with a partner that we typically don't work with, but we knew that their network was pretty extensive in a different way than ours, the Metropolitan Planning Council in Chicago. And that really catalyzed a conversation with the city, the school district, internet service providers that actually helped us in thinking through what some of the solutions could be. Community-based organizations, there are 35 partners that are part of this now. And a host of our parents and others in the network that were just part of the discussion from the beginning. So fast forward, it took about 6 weeks to stand up. Fast forward to today, we have what is now, I think, the country's largest free internet program with the longest duration. We have 63,000 kids that are connected through Chicago Public Schools to the free service, 42,000 households, still growing. It is a prototype for other cities now that are using the model. And we hope to continue to see, we're trying to get to 100,000 kids connected or somewhere close, because we think that the need is still there. And even with us kind of coming out of quarantine in some fashion, I don't think that we're going to go back to anything that looked like what it did pre-COVID. And so this has been kind of a perfect example of how, when everyone's kind of galvanized around the same issue and focused in the same way towards that goal, the partnership was very easy and is still one that we are seeing every week with our operational meetings around this issue. Like, the same group of players are coming to the table to try to make this work.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And thanks to all of you for giving us an understanding of what you do. I'm going to switch gears a little bit and want to talk a little bit about how you do that. And I want to start with you, Nelson, because you mentioned the idea of working with the Marshallese community in Northwest Arkansas and the Latinx community in Northwest Arkansas, which, it's my understanding historically that's not a space in which the Northwest Arkansas Council would traditionally engage. And so there's always this opportunity to engage partners that you either don't align with, or you have some alignment but just haven't engaged significantly. And my question that I'm getting to is this idea of, how do you build that relationship? Specifically, I'm interested in the idea of trust the idea of building trust in collaborative environments, specifically when your aim or goal, you all may have the same aim or goal, but how you think about that work may be differently. So can you talk a little bit about trust in collaborative environments?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. In that particular instance, you're right. That's not a population that we traditionally work in. We work at a kind of, I guess, a higher level, for lack of a better term, of coordination. But in that instance, when we put together the proposal and the program and were able to get state money through the CARES Act, $7 million to do this program, there was some criticism from the community-based organizations that why would the council receive this? It could be better utilized in other places. And so what we were able to do was through strong communication and also the right partnerships. So UAMS Northwest, which was one of our partners, and the health division has been on the ground in those communities for decades. The community clinic, the federally qualified health clinic, has been on the ground in those communities for a long, long time. And so bringing them into the fold, into our overall organization, making sure that they were the on the ground points of contacts, and we were kind of the collaborator and convener, and we were able to build trust and build a successful program through that. We're facing a bit of that now with our new workforce housing initiative that we are standing up, thanks to the Walton Family Foundation, to let us get ahead of a problem. We are a rapidly growing region. Housing prices are growing pretty significantly, maybe not like they are in Chicago, Daniel, but growing here nonetheless. And now we are in a position where not only do we have to work with those same populations, the Marshallese, Latinx, and others, we are going to be bringing together developers and individuals that build housing and try to bring them together in a way that they see that the model that they may be using right now, single family, spread out, is not a good path for the future. And so there's going to be a lot of work to be done there to bring them into the fold, and also to acknowledge and respect the work that they're doing already to help address this problem. So I think you only do that through communication, building those trusted partnerships, and that's only done through showing up and doing the work. And so I think in all of these instances, you use partnerships to get connected and then prove your worth and show them that you are interested in their point of view and listening to them and then executing on that.
Yeah, thanks for that. Hey, Gabby, I can't even begin to imagine the complexity around your work, right? I mean, when you want to talk about a collaborative environment, you're working with, aquaculture producers, fishing distributors, retailers, NGOs. I mean, the list goes on and on. Talk to me a little bit about the complexity of creating, collaborative and collaborations and a collaborative environment that span a number of different industries and sectors.
Well, it is complex, and that's the first thing that we have to acknowledge. We tend to talk about collaboration as something that comes naturally, almost intuitive. And sometimes the incentives, even from funders, are actually work against collaboration. So designing a collaboration ecosystem like the one we have requires time. It takes resources, awareness, and intention, and of course trust, as we were talking about before. Something that we have learned, Kim, over the past 4 years is that collaboration is also a process of co-creation of reality and creating shared narratives of possibilities. And it's a common mistake to assume that everybody understands reality in the same way. We don't. A cross-sector group like ours brings together numerous realities into a room or into a Zoom call. And one of the first steps to build trust is understanding the differences while honoring them and creating a shared narrative and sense of purpose to achieve change. Again, that sounds easy, but it's not. And lastly, I've learned, and I really want to emphasize this, that collaboration is not only about roles and institutions. It is about relationships. It's about people. So we're not just dealing with content, but with human interactions and human struggles. So ego, lack of trust, and competition, those are all emotions that are present in a process and shape the interactions. Approaching collaboration, I believe, also means recognizing those emotions, providing a safe space for some of them, and creating a culture that helps you rise above others. So it sounds a little, I don't know, I don't even know the word in English, but collaboration truly requires that we develop our own competences to reach into each other's humanness. And that's something that we almost never talk about.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Look, I can spend all day talking about this because it's a very strong interest of mine. But I know we'd love to hear from the audience out there as well. I'm sure there's some questions from the audience for our panelists. So I'd love to sort of get to those.
All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Daphne Moore. I'm Communications Director for the Walton Family Foundation, and have a few questions for our panelists here. So let's start off with, I love this one, and it's basically what's the first step? Like, really break it down for us. Todd told us what not to do. Don't get the band back together. But what is truly the first step when you want to work with new and different partners that you have not worked with in the past? I'll let any of you choose to jump in. Okay, Gabriella, you smiled, so I'm gonna go to you. What is the real first step that you take when working with new and different partners that you've not approached before?
I'm usually smiling, Daphne, but I will say that one of the first steps is truly learning to value difference and even conflict, accepting it. I know I have had a hard time doing that. Inviting diverse perspectives, experiences, and viewpoints sounds wonderful, but it's also very challenging because difference can lead to conflict, and sometimes it is easier to ignore it than to address it openly and constructively. But conflict can also foster creativity and lead to innovation. So I would say it doesn't make sense to ignore difference. You embrace it and learn how to work with it.
Thank you. Nelson, Daniel, anything to add there?
I would just quickly add, and I totally agree with that. I think the first step in our work, and I think in a lot of work, has to be identifying who's directly impacted by the issue that you're talking about, because I think being able to center on those individuals, and in education, I think we have had this challenge with collective illusion, to use Mr. Rose's word. But the collective illusion has been we don't trust parents to actually, make the best decisions for their kids in the education system sometimes. And when you actually center the work on who is actually directly impacted, and that's the families in the school system, or you can pick any issue and probably figure that out, it starts to tell you who needs to be around the table. And that's just organically going to mean that you have to bring people to the table to try to solve for this issue in collaboration with community that probably don't typically shake hands on a frequent basis. So I think having an identification of who is at the center of the problem is really critical to getting that collaboration to happen.
Thanks. Nelson, you had something quick to say, I think?
Well, yeah, I think that's right. I mean, Daniel kind of hit on it. I believe that, many times just a trusted third party introduction, someone who's trusted on both sides to help lay the groundwork for, a foundational meeting and understanding is always helpful. I think from our perspective, we do a lot of work with our big businesses, but if you dig deep into our agenda, it's not a business focused organization necessarily. So a lot of people don't necessarily understand all the areas where we work. And so having some trusted third parties make those introductions is helpful.
This is a combination of two questions, but how have each of you in your organizations really taken an assessment of your partnerships and identified gaps? What does that look like? How have you approached it? And what advice do you have for others looking to do the same? And I think you've touched on that as far as Daniel talking about who's most impacted by an issue, but what other advice can you offer here?
Well, on our end,
go ahead. You go first.
Oh no, I was just going to say I would like to say that we've made an assessment post-COVID, but we're not quite there yet. I think the most important thing really is that in good times, you have to build those trusted relationships, and so when it becomes an emergency, the way it did with COVID, we were really struggling and reaching out to identify the right partners that could help us with certain initiatives. And I think what I've learned is that, in every issue area that we focus on is developing those partnerships, when times are good or at least better, is so critically important because you need trust to go into those relationships to make progress. And so you only build that trust over time.
And throw out one last question, and you guys can jump in, put you a little bit in the hot seat, or give you the opportunity to share what's on your mind. But tell us, what can philanthropy do differently now in the not quite post-pandemic world? But what are the lessons that funders should be taking away from the past 12 to 18 months?
I can try being brief on that one. I think that philanthropy has a huge role to play. And one of the changes that we really need to see, and that's something that I really appreciate about the Walton Family Foundation, is that the pace of a collaborative can be different and the outcomes are different and the outputs. So it takes a shift of mind in betting on these kind of processes and allowing them to flourish and grow over time without putting too much pressure on it. I think that's a major shift that we need to see from other funders. Anyone else? Any thoughts?
Yeah, so I would say, just watching the video in the beginning was a pretty good capture of how things have shifted. I mean, those closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And I think a lot of what we're hearing here is, and I do feel like they are the tiebreaker for this collective illusion concept. And when people have differences, when you actually center on the individuals that are directly impacted, they often solve a lot of those differences very quickly. But it does require philanthropy to have a deference in power. There's a lot of power that's wielded when you have the funding, and organizations respond to that. So how does philanthropy think about really putting the power in the hands of those who are directly impacted? Not necessarily organizations like ours, but the people at the end of the chain that really should be leading the work. And so that's a big undertaking because it really requires kind of a paradigm shift in how we think about how this work is supposed to happen.
Thank you. And we have hit time. I'm going to close us out, although I think, Daniel, your summary there was perfect. But I will just say thank you to our panelists. Thank you for your candor and your willingness to talk about what's working and what's not working. Our moderator, Kim, who is always fantastic, and Romy and Todd, who really set the stage for this conversation. As we move forward over the next few years and beyond, we're really focused on the belief that the change that we are all after requires us to listen and to learn together. And so to that end, we're going to continue these sessions on a quarterly basis. So look for more details on third and fourth quarter events, and encourage everyone to invite at least one colleague to join you. And I just want to say, have a productive rest of the week, and we wish you all a restful and reflective holiday weekend. So thank you again for joining us.